Let me tell you something, my friend. There's a profound truth you need to embrace if you're feeling worn out from carrying the weight of being strong for so long. Your strength is a gift from the Creator, but even the strongest warriors need rest, renewal, and reliance on His power to keep going. You've been resilient, holding it together through trials, supporting others, pushing forward despite pain, but exhaustion creeps in when you try to do it all in your own strength. Inspired by the wisdom of Dr. Myles Munroe, today I want to talk to you about why you're exhausted from being strong, how God designed you to find rest in Him, and how to replenish your spirit so you can continue walking in your purpose without burning out. You see, the Creator made you with a purpose, a divine calling to shine, to overcome, and to make a difference in His kingdom. Your strength, your ability to endure, to lead, to carry burdens is part of that design. But Dr. Munroe taught that true strength isn't about never breaking. It's about knowing when to lean on God's infinite power. When you're constantly strong for everyone else, your family, your friends, your work, even yourself, without pausing to rest in God's presence, you deplete your spirit. Exhaustion doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're human, and God is calling you to a deeper reliance on Him where His strength sustains you. When you're exhausted from being strong, it's a signal to surrender your burdens to the one who never grows weary. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you're running on empty, trying to be the rock for everyone while your own heart feels heavy? Maybe you've been the one to solve problems, wipe tears, or keep pushing through your own struggles, all while hiding your fatigue. Perhaps you're carrying responsibilities that seem endless, or you feel guilty for even thinking about resting because others depend on you. In those moments, it's easy to feel trapped, like you have to keep being strong or everything will fall apart. But let me tell you something. You were never meant to carry the world alone. Your exhaustion is not a failure. It's an invitation from God to find rest, to refill your spirit, and to let His strength take over. Let's talk about why you're exhausted from being strong. Dr. Munroe often emphasized that exhaustion comes when you operate outside of God's design for your strength. First, you may be carrying burdens that aren't yours to bear. Other people's problems, expectations, or responsibilities that God didn't assign to you. Second, you might be relying on your own power instead of tapping into God's unlimited strength, trying to muscle through challenges without His guidance. Third, you may not be resting physically or spiritually, neglecting the renewal that comes from time in God's presence. And finally, you could be battling a spiritual attack where the enemy uses weariness to distract you from your purpose. When you're exhausted, it's a sign that something needs to shift. God wants you to release, rest, and rely on Him. Let's talk about carrying burdens that aren't yours. As a strong person, you naturally step up, helping others, fixing problems, holding things together. But Dr. Munroe taught that not every burden is your assignment. Some people lean on you instead of God, and some responsibilities belong to others or to Him. When you take on what's not yours, you drain your energy and miss the purpose God has for you. Psalm 55:22 says, "Cast your cares on the Lord, and He will sustain you." When you're exhausted from being strong, it's time to discern what's yours to carry and what to release to God, trusting Him to handle what you cannot. Let's talk about relying on your own strength. Dr. Munroe often said that human strength is limited, but God's strength is infinite. When you try to be strong without leaning on Him through prayer, His word, or His Spirit, you burn out. Isaiah 40:31 promises, "Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles." Your exhaustion is a reminder that you're not Superman or Superwoman. You're a child of God, designed to draw strength from Him. When you're surrounded by challenges, don't just grit your teeth and push through. Pause, pray, and let God's power flow through you. His strength never runs dry. Let's talk about the need for rest. Rest is not a luxury, it's a divine mandate. Dr. Munroe taught that God created the Sabbath for a reason, to restore your body, mind, and spirit. When you're constantly strong, always on, never pausing, you violate God's design for renewal. Exhaustion sets in because you're running without refueling. Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Resting in God through quiet time, worship, or simply being still recharges your spirit. When you're exhausted from being strong, rest is your weapon, allowing God to refresh you for the journey ahead. Let's talk about spiritual attacks. Dr. Munroe emphasized that the enemy, Satan, targets those who are walking in purpose, using weariness as a tactic to derail you. When you're exhausted, it's not always just physical or emotional. It can be a spiritual battle. The enemy whispers lies, "You're not enough, you can't keep going," or "No one cares." But Ephesians 6:10 reminds us to be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. When you're surrounded by darkness, recognize the battle, put on God's armor, and fight back with prayer, praise, and the truth of who you are in Him. Your exhaustion is not the end. It's a call to stand firm in spiritual warfare. Let's talk about the power of surrender. Surrender doesn't mean giving up, it means giving over. Dr. Munroe taught that surrendering to God is the key to true strength. When you're exhausted from being strong, surrender your burdens, your fears, your need to control, and let God take the lead. 1 Peter 5:7 says, "Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you." Surrender is an act of faith, trusting that God is bigger than your challenges and stronger than your weaknesses. When you surrender, you trade exhaustion for His peace, weariness for His power, and despair for His hope. Surrender is your pathway to renewal. Let's talk about the power of God's presence. Dr. Munroe often said that the presence of God is your source of strength. When you're exhausted, spending time with Him through prayer, worship, or meditating on His word replenishes your soul. Psalm 16:11 says, "In your presence is fullness of joy." God's presence is where you find peace that restores, wisdom that guides, and strength that sustains. When you're surrounded by demands, carve out moments to be still with God. His presence is your refuge, the place where exhaustion gives way to divine energy. Make time for Him and watch your spirit come alive. Let's talk about the power of boundaries. Boundaries are your protection, guarding your energy and purpose. Dr. Munroe taught that you must say no to what drains you and yes to what aligns with God's plan. When you're exhausted from being strong, it's often because you've overextended yourself, taking on too much for too many. Boundaries mean prioritizing your health, your calling, and your time with God. They're about saying, my strength is for God's purpose, not everyone's demands. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're stewardship, ensuring you have enough to give where it matters most. Set them and reclaim your energy. Let's talk about the power of purpose. Your purpose is your anchor, the reason you were created. Dr. Munroe taught that when you live for God's purpose, you tap into a strength beyond yourself. Exhaustion often comes when you're scattered, chasing things outside your calling. When you're surrounded by pressures, refocus on why you're here, to serve God, to impact lives, to reflect His glory. Your purpose gives meaning to your struggles and direction to your strength. When you're exhausted from being strong, your purpose reminds you that your efforts are not in vain, and God will sustain you to fulfill it. Let's talk about the power of community. Dr. Munroe emphasized that God places people around you to share the load. When you're exhausted from being strong, you don't have to go it alone. Surround yourself with believers who uplift you, pray for you, and remind you of God's promises. Let them carry some of your burdens through their support, encouragement, or practical help. Galatians 6:2 says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Community is your strength, a gift from God to keep you from breaking under the weight. Lean on them and let their faith bolster yours. Let's talk about the power of gratitude. Gratitude shifts your perspective, turning exhaustion into expectation. Dr. Munroe taught that giving thanks aligns you with God's heart, reminding you of His faithfulness. When you're exhausted, pause to thank God for the strength you've had, the battles you've won, and the purpose He's given you. Gratitude doesn't deny your weariness. It reframes it, showing you that God has carried you this far and will carry you further. Philippians 4:6 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." Gratitude is your lifeline, pulling you out of despair and into hope. Let's talk about the power of renewal. Dr. Munroe taught that God is a God of restoration, and He wants to renew you daily. Exhaustion is a signal that you need to refill your spirit, not a sign that you're done. Lamentations 3:22-23 says, "His mercies are new every morning." Renewal comes through rest, prayer, worship, and time in God's Word. It's also practical, eating well, sleeping enough, and caring for your body, which is God's temple. When you're exhausted from being strong, renewal is your reset, preparing you for the next leg of your journey. Seek it daily and let God restore your soul. Let's talk about the power of faith. Faith is what keeps you going when your strength runs out. Dr. Munroe taught that faith is acting like God is telling the truth, trusting His promises even when you're weary. When you're exhausted, faith says, "God is my refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." Psalm 46:1. Faith doesn't ignore your fatigue. It anchors you in God's ability to carry you through. Believe that He sees your weariness, knows your limits, and has a plan to sustain you. When you're surrounded by demands, faith is your foundation, reminding you that God's power is made perfect in your weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:9. Let's talk about moving forward without exhaustion. Dr. Munroe taught that God doesn't want you to just survive, He wants you to thrive. Moving forward means learning to balance strength with surrender, effort with rest, and responsibility with reliance on God. It's about pacing yourself, prioritizing your purpose, and trusting God to handle what you can't. When you're exhausted from being strong, moving forward doesn't mean pushing harder. It means leaning deeper into God's grace. Take one step at a time, guided by His Spirit, and watch Him renew your strength for the journey ahead. Let's talk about the power of God's strength in you. The Creator didn't make you to be strong in your own power. He made you to be strong in Him. Dr. Munroe often quoted Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Your exhaustion is an opportunity for God to show His power through you. When you're weak, He's strong. When you're tired, He's tireless. When you're empty, He's overflowing. Lean into His strength and let it carry you where your own cannot. When you're exhausted from being strong, God's strength is your victory, making you unstoppable in His purpose. Now, I want to leave you with this. You are enough. You are enough because the Creator lives in you and His strength is yours. You don't need to carry every burden because God is your burden bearer. You don't need to be strong alone because God is your source. You don't need to fear exhaustion because God is your renewal. You are enough because you were created with a purpose and He will sustain you to fulfill it. No matter how heavy the load, no matter how deep the weariness, no matter how real the fatigue, you keep going, not in your own strength, but in His. Lay down your burdens, rest in His presence, and rise in His power because your exhaustion doesn't define you. Your purpose does. Your weariness doesn't limit you. Your destiny does. The Creator's strength is greater than your fatigue, and He's calling you to a life of impact, not burnout. So surrender, rest, and step boldly into the renewed strength that awaits you.